Hello, I'm going to go ahead and start sharing my screen. My name is Victoria Gleason. I am the Utility Efficiency Conservation Coordinator with the City of Santa Clara. And the City of Santa Clara Water and Sewer Utilities is hosting tonight's class, which is Creating California Native Habitat Gardens with our wonderful instructor, Juanita Salisbury. It looks like we've got a fair number of people in the class right now. Pardon as I get the slides set up. And that does do what I wanted. Okay, so like I mentioned, we're here tonight for Creating California Native Habitat Gardens. For the class, everyone is muted right now, and we would really appreciate any questions that you have. We will save all the questions for the end, so don't worry that you're being ignored. We will address them all together at the end of the presentation. And this webinar is being recorded. It usually takes a couple of weeks for it to get up on BOSCA's website, but I would imagine by the middle of next month, you would be able to easily find it. For any questions, please do feel free to put them in either the chat or the Q&A. And again, we will do them at the end. For those of you unfamiliar with BOSCA, it is the Bay Area Water Supply and Conservation Agency. They kind of represent, and when I say represent 26 agencies, they're really kind of moderators between the agencies in the state. I don't know if you've been reading about all the new water restrictions and regulations that are coming up statewide, but BOSCA really negotiates on the behalf of all of their agencies. So in addition to all the public education they do a lot of work behind the scenes to make sure that your water gets delivered in a very fair way and that supplies are evenly distributed to all of their partner agencies. They serve 1.8 million people and 40,000 businesses and organizations in San Mateo, Santa Clara, and Alameda counties. So education is a big part of their program objective to make sure that everybody in our community receives the water that is their right as a member of the Bay Area community. And we've discovered over the years that outdoor water use is still the biggest place that water goes to waste, potable water, drinking water. And so the mission of the agency is to, through this gardening program, is to really teach us different ways that we can reduce our water use and redirect that water for necessary things, you know, that we all need: cooking, bathing, cleaning, all of that stuff. So many of the programs that they offer are rebate programs to give you incentives to do the right thing. Many of you may have taken advantage of the Lawn Begun program. Valley Water has a similar program that's lawn conversion to remove grass and replace it with water-wise, drought-tolerant plants. And you get significant rebates. They vary depending on the city that you're in, so do check with your local city to see what cost sharing is available for those. But they can, depending on the type of garden you're looking for, pay for a significant portion of those projects, depending on your end goal. Rain barrel rebates are also available through different municipalities and through BOSCA, up to $200 per rain barrel. The Smart Controller rebate is one of the easier ones in my mind. It's a very good incentive program for people who have aging controllers that, you know, the old dial models and things like that that are starting to run down. It's a very straightforward rebate, and they offer some good products there. And also rain gardens, in addition to rain barrels, help capture rainwater that's coming off of your roof to redirect it to the garden instead of running off into the storm drains. So you can get some nice rebates for those as well and beautify your garden. The City of Santa Clara is offering some really nice rebates for lawn conversion. We were one of the first in the state to go up to a total of $4 per square foot for residential for the first 1,000 square feet. So residents of Santa Clara can get up to $5,000. And for commercial properties, that can go up to $110,000, depending on the amount of turf that you have in the garden to be converted. And if you're looking into those projects on the City of Santa Clara Garden Guide website, there are some PDFs that you can download that are subsets of the Valley Water qualifying plant lists that have photos accompanying in addition to the square footage. So that gives you kind of a head start in looking for plants, takes some of the guesswork out of those botanical names. You can kind of browse through and see what you like. So do check that out if you're looking to do a lawn conversion and you're kind of lost with the plant lists. And mentioning Valley Water, they do have a similar Lawn Be Gone program. Theirs is a landscape conversion rebate. They have a base rate of $1 to $2 per square foot. And then, like I mentioned, different cities offer different cost sharing to bring those numbers up even higher. So it's definitely worth looking into. Excuse me. And South Bay Green Gardens also provides a lot of resources. If you're a little unsure of design, they have some nice templates, some great plant lists, examples, tips and videos. So it's a really good resource for garden projects that you're doing on your own. So a thank you from Valley Water. If you have questions or need information about their rebate programs, conservation@valleywater.org is generally what I've found to be the quickest way to get a question answered from them. They respond typically within a day. So that's a good avenue to pursue with them. Upcoming Bosca classes are on your screen. The next one is Pruning Native Plants and Trees, which is actually tomorrow night. So if you're interested in native gardens given tonight's class topic, check out tomorrow night's class at 6:30, same time, different day. And this last slide is bayareagardening.org. This is a pretty nice website. If you're less familiar with plants, they offer a lot of finished projects. You can hover over the photographs and it'll actually tell you what the plants are. So just visually looking at things you like, you can instantly get some nice feedback about what plants are paired with what, how they look in certain areas. So again, if you're looking for a do-it-yourself project, that's a nice place to start. And with that, I will figure out how to stop sharing. I think I just did it. All right, so again, our tonight's instructor is Juanita Salisbury, and she's given wonderful presentations. I've learned so much from her in the past, so I'm excited to hear tonight's topic. Thank you.
Well, thank you, Victoria. That was wonderful. Let me share my screen and get it started here. All right, well, good evening, everybody. I am Juanita Salisbury. I'm a California landscape architect, and I, among other things, design native habitat gardens and have a number of public gardens here in Palo Alto that I've been doing for the last 8 years. And I do a lot of observations, and those observations end up on Facebook and Instagram, which is under the Primrose Way Pollinator Garden, YouTube, Primrose Way. And if you don't like social media, you can try my website, which is primrosewaypollinatorgarden.com. If you'd like to see native plants in action here in Palo Alto, we have a number of gardens that I created, maintain, and always looking for volunteers. Here as you come in to Palo Alto along Embarcadero Road, we have the first garden that we ever did 8 years ago, the Primrose Way Pollinator Garden, thus the name. A corridor that we're doing connecting that garden with the Gwynda Street Garden. Up Newell Avenue or Newell Road, we have the Hopkins Avenue Garden, Arcadia Place, the Island Drive Garden, and then our two newest gardens, West Greenwich and the Churchill Street Gardens. They're looking great right now, and I would just like to mention that I am doing a Earth Day event with the City of Palo Alto on Sunday at the Rinconada Library from 1 until 4, and that library is right here. And part of that event will be a walking tour, self-guided walking tour with these gardens. So we're also giving away some free plants. So if you have any time on Sunday and you want to know more, come and see us. It's going to be a lot of fun. So I'm going to keep it very simple tonight. I'm going to talk about planning, planting, and maintaining. Some people feel overwhelmed by habitats and what they mean and what they represent. But the thing that I like to tell people is to start simple and build from there. It's just easier that way. And I'm with 8 gardens and thousands of plants. It's the simple stuff is the best. One thing that you should ask yourself when you're starting out with your planning is just what are your habitat goals? You know, are you interested in helping birds? Are you interested in helping pollinators? Do you want to decrease the temperature around your house with shady plants? Do you, what are your goals? What do you want to achieve? So, and I can't answer those questions for you. So consider it as that, what are those things that you would like to do? And the photographs that I feature are from my observations over the last 8 years. And so I know what things actually work because I see organisms using them. And so everything that I'm going to recommend tonight has been vetted by almost weekly observations for the last 8 years. So when I say, do you want to help birds? A native garden is great for helping birds. You probably already know that. Um, and we've seen such huge reduction in native bird numbers. It's really quite distressing, but native gardens are like one of the easiest ways that you can help them. And these are some birds that were taken. Um, these pictures were taken in my own home garden. And in planning, consider that California is a biodiversity hotspot. So we have all of the tools that we need. And we have a lot to choose from. There's almost 8,000 species of plants here in California that are found almost nowhere else, more than any other state in the United States. So we have lots of abundance to choose from. And that abundance gives us abundant ecological benefits. It supports wildlife as well as pollinators and other insects. And native plants, because many of them are drought tolerant, it helps with water conservation. Thus, why I'm speaking in terms of talking for Bosca, because native plants are really great tools in our water conservation toolkit. And when you consider that insect species are, including pollinators, are declining worldwide, with some declining up to 70% in some areas, native plants are just, I won't call them the panacea, but they're very close to being the best tool that we have in our toolkit to solve many problems with one fell swoop. And I've observed a lot of life over the last 8 years, so I can tell you that what I'm going to give you actually works really well. So people are saying, what should I plant? And I have a go-to resource to find plants, and this is the website that is done by the California Native Plant Society. It's calscape.org. This is their landing page. I just did a screenshot here where you can look at what to plant. It's a easily searchable database, lots of information and resource. You can find everything that you need to know about California native plants and research on those plants. And then you can create a plant palette with trees, shrubs, perennials, bulbs, vines, and so forth. And they break it down for you into all of the plants. You can see 7,984. And then they break it down by trees, shrubs, perennials, annuals, grasses, succulents, and so forth. You can look for specific location to see what grows in your area. So plant what is local. And then they have some information about Calscape, where to find the plants. So you can find nurseries that have those plants with handy links to those nurseries' websites, which generally do have an inventory list. So you can go and see if they have a plant that you want in stock. And they have design and inspiration. And then this interesting tab, butterflies, which I'll talk about in a minute. and then my plant list, which is something you can create an Excel spreadsheet to keep track of what you plant in your garden. And this is my go-to resource for plants. If you have a lawn, get rid of it. It's kind of useless. If you need an outdoor area, um, that's a different kind of functional thing for a place to walk on. Um, I've done talks in the past about some alternatives to lawn if you want a nice place to go barefoot. Um, but if you're looking to get rid of your lawn, an easy way to do it rather than digging it up and sweating a lot is to just put down some cardboard to smother the grass right on top of it and then pile some mulch and compost on the top. And then you can make a hole in the cardboard and plant right in there and you're off and running. And this is from stopwaste.org. This again is a screenshot, tells you how to do this, what's called sheet mulching. Super easy to do and helpful in lawn conversion. Some of the basics of plant layout, people say, well, how many do I need? Um, so consider your planting area. I like to use graph paper to lay things out. Graph paper is easily accessible to everybody, and you can use it to scale things correctly. So you can have 1 square equaling 1 foot. So this is just an example. If you had a 12 foot by 12 foot square, and then what you want to do is once you figure out what plants you want, draw them as circles at their mature diameter. And you can figure out like these are about 2.5 to 3 feet across. And so the way that you find out the spacing is your circles should just overlap or barely touch like this. And it will give you the number of plants that you need to create a certain effect. You can do massing. And that way, once you have a number, then you can go and buy the plants and you're off and running. Or you can give it to your landscape contractor who might install it for you and will get the plants yourself or themselves for you. Either way, it's just a handy reference. You can, having a plan, remember I'm all about the planning, is a really good way to start. So make a plan. Um, Now, in terms of choosing plants, the best way to guarantee success is to wield some ecological power, and that power comes from keystone species. What do we mean by keystone species? Well, as I said, you want to maximize your success by planting keystone species first. And a keystone species plays a pivotal role in an ecosystem. Without it, the entire ecosystem would be dramatically different or might even cease to exist. These species have low functional redundancy, meaning that no other species can fully replace their ecological niche. So if you plant multiple keystone species, you get high functional redundancy, meaning you have a lot of backups to protect ecosystem stability. So a keystone species does something that not many plants can do, and they hold everything together. And you want to start with a keystone species. And let's talk about some of the benefits of those keystone species besides providing ecosystem stability. There are a number of different benefits. One of the key benefits is an amplified impact because one of these plants has a huge effect, a huge impact on the environment relative to other plants. If you plant those first, then you jumpstart the development of your habitat. Another benefit is adaptation. Many keystone plants are particularly well suited, well adapted to the local environment, and planting them first allows them to establish quickly, and that creates a foundation and it fosters conditions suitable for other native species to thrive. So they set the stage, as it were. Connection. Keystone species act as connectors in the environment, creating a ripple effect of connections throughout the environment. They provide a framework. They can create living physical structures like trunks of trees and shrubs that can provide support for vines to grow up in them. They provide niches that benefits a variety of other plant and animal species. They save time by planting your high impact species first. You maximize that ecological benefit sooner. You don't waste any time. So if you really want to get in there and change the environment quickly, plant a keystone first. You leverage their power to create a network of ready-made connections. They're economical. You can achieve the maximum ecological benefits with limited resources and minimal effort. Even a single plant, a keystone plant in a pot, can help. And scalability. This concept can be applied to gardens of all sizes. Even if you just have a little narrow 1-foot strip along a fence line, you can totally create a habitat there. Or if you have several acres, same thing. So you can use this concept in every size garden. So how do you know if a plant is a keystone species? Well, consider plant function. Plants are the primary producers of food and the basis of food webs. So energy from the sun gets into the plants, which are then eaten by insects, which are then eaten by birds. And so in a sense, when you're planting these keystone species, you're turning sunlight, you're turning starlight into birds. So that's a power of these plants, that they provide food for plant-eating insects. 37% of animal species are plant-eating insects. And as a rule, native insects only eat the native plants they evolved with. They're very picky about the chemicals that they like in their plant matter, like monarchs and milkweed. A lot of insects are very similar. And so the plants that efficiently channel that sun's energy into the food web in ways that other plants can't, those are likely to be keystone species. And so that means that plants are not decorations, plants are food. And so this means that native plants will attract many native pollinators, other insects, birds, and other organisms. And among other things, keystone plants provide food for many more species than do other plants. And so if you have a plant that feeds 50 species of insects versus one that feeds 3, the one that feeds 50 species is going to be more of a keystone species than the other one. That's not a hard and fast rule. There's kind of nuances to that. But these are a great way to maximize the number of creatures that you're supporting with a plant that feeds a whole huge number of different insects. And CalScape helps to sort out those plants that feed multiple species. And so this is where we go to that butterfly tab. And so what I've done here is I've ranked the plants by number of butterflies hosted. And this is just a screenshot of that. And the top one, willows are great. And then you go down to oaks, cherries, the prunus, and so on and so forth. And so many of the trees provide keystone benefits. Another place that you can go to find out more about what a native keystone plant is the National Wildlife Federation's native keystone plants for different areas. This is for the Mediterranean region, the California ecoregion, number 11. And it talks about a couple of different kinds of keystone plants. The host plants, the ones that feed the larva, and then plants that feed specialist bees who only feed on a specific type of pollen from specific plants. And so they list out those plants in terms of the trees, the shrubs, herbaceous perennials and so forth, and then the various types of um, plants that feed the most for larval hosts and then pollen specialists. So these are just a couple of PDFs that you can go to find on their website and download those as a handy guide. I personally love to do oak trees. If I have the opportunity to plant an oak, I'm totally going to plant one. And here in our valley, Quercus lobata, or the valley oak, no other tree comes close to delivering all of the benefits that oaks do in terms of being keystone species. Willows are right up there. Oaks may be better. They're certainly they use a little bit less water than a willow does. It's not impossible to grow a willow in the home garden. I have one in mine, and I barely water it, and it seems to be hanging in there. But the oak trees are great. They used to be, this particular oak tree used to be 61% of the tree cover in the Santa Clara Valley. Now it's only about 1%. So if you have room to plant a valley oak in your backyard or your front yard, or if you can twist the arm of your city to plant them as street trees, that would be a good one. If you don't want to deal with as much leaf litter as a street tree, you could try the live oak, which is not deciduous like this, which means they drop all their leaves once a year, but you just leave those leaves in place under the tree, of course, off the sidewalk and the roadways. Um, but that supports the health of the tree. Leaves from plants that drop those leaves are that plant's fertilizer. So they make their own fertilizer. So you want to just leave the leaves. On the valley oak, those tap roots will go down into the water table, which here in Palo Alto is about 10 feet down. That pulls the water up, and then their lateral surface roots spreads the water out and shares it with other plants. And there's some great information about that on the Calscape website that I showed you before. Planting underneath oaks, you want to do native plants only. Monardella species, the coyote mint, nicely smelling like mint, are best to grow underneath of the trees because non-native plants can adversely affect the health of the tree. And these trees are insect factories. They will feed birds all day long and then some. They actually grow really quickly. People are like, oh, how fast? It's like 2 or 3 feet a year, sometimes more. And usually about by the third year, that's when they really take off. They can live up to 600 years, so they're a real investment that lasts for generations, and they add value to real estate. And this is over at the Hopkins Avenue Pollinator Garden. She is the anchor tree in this garden and just makes the rest of the gardening really easy. Everything seems to really like it there because she has prepared the way. Some specific plants that I have vetted in our gardens that I also consider keystone species. And this is the Ceanothus maritima valley violet. And even though it's a nativar or cultivar, I find that for these plants, I vet them by seeing that they actually do feed a wide variety of insects. And as you can see, here's a bumblebee coming out in January, nectaring and gathering pollen. And I see a lot of bumblebees. So this plant works in terms of like supporting the ecosystem that they're in. Super low water use, larval host for dozens of butterfly and moth species. Really a great plant, almost completely carefree. Another good one are the Arctostaphylos species, otherwise known as the manzanitas. I like to use the scientific names because there are so many different kinds of manzanitas that it's better sometimes to, don't be scared of the scientific name. We have the genus and species, so Arctostaphylos, and then the species densiflora. This is a variety called Howard McMinn. And I know for a fact that bumblebees like this plant, so we can support bumblebees, which also seem to really like the nectar. I do know that the orchard bees, the blue orchard bees, the osmias, will nectar on this as well. And I've seen a variety of insects eating the leaves. So this plant, even though it is a cultivar, has been vetted. It's easy to grow and it's just lovely. Arctostaphylos species provide support for 78 caterpillar species and 13 pollen specialist bees. And the berries provide food for other animals and shelter for other organisms. And this is from the National Wildlife Federation. So super easy to grow. Don't need to be watered in the summertime. One of my other favorites, I do like Aribes because I like to support bumblebee species. These grow and bloom in the wintertime. And this is actually at the Hopkins Garden in December. And this is Ribes malvaceum. It's a chaparral plant, and she is just gorgeous and blooms for weeks and weeks and weeks. So, and she is just covered by cute little fuzzy bumblebees in the wintertime. And cute fact about bumblebees is that they can control their body temperature and they actually prefer the cooler temperatures. So that's why they come out in the wintertime. Super low water use. This one gets about 5 to 8 feet tall, 5 feet wide. Host plant to 3 confirmed and 76 likely species of moths and butterflies. She really puts on a show, just a magical looking plant in the wintertime. Another ceanothus that I like, Ceanothus horizontalis. This is, remember I talked about the other one, it was a maritima. This one's a horizontalis. And my goodness, what might that mean? Horizontalis, well, it's a ground cover. It stays horizontal. And this does not like to be watered in the summertime at all. And so you can replace your lawn if you're looking to have that sort of clean green swath that's very uniform. This works great. It's a great alternative for lawn. It's evergreen, which means it keeps its leaves. It's about 15 inches tall and spreading. Blue blossoms in the wintertime, grows in sun or shade. Little afternoon shade probably is not a bad thing. And given a wide enough space, these can provide some great spaces for ground nesting birds. So trees, if you, I always like to tell people to start with trees first when you're planting things. And, people say, well, what can I possibly fit into my yard if there are existing trees or not enough space? And in my own yard, which is small, I have crammed in a, a whole bunch of trees. And this isn't even all of them that I have in my own home garden. But these are all vetted. So any of these will, you could try. I have a lot of real good success with them. The big leaf maple, the Acer macrophyllum. Another easy to grow one is Cercocarpus betuloides, the mountain mahogany. Super easy, and so on and so forth. But it's like the prunus, the cherries. So I have a couple of different cherries. This is the Prunus ilicifolia. This one does not like water at all during the summertime. Our native toyon, the heteromelias. I have not watered this since I planted it about 6 years ago, or 7 years ago. There's just a huge variety of things, and all of these plants do get used by organisms in the environment. So once again, a vetted list of goodies for you. So when you go back to the YouTube video of this, you can pause and just look at this and maybe make a list and see which one might fit your situation. But so recommended species, if you have room, do your trees. If you can do an oak of some kind, if you don't have room for a big oak, do a scrub oak. Scrub oaks are shrubby and they're not quite as tall. The Acer species, the maples, the Prunus species, the cherries, and then shrubs, Arctostaphylos, otherwise known as the manzanitas, Ceanothus. This has a couple of common names, blue blossom, California lilac. I don't find the common names that descriptive. It's much better to go with the scientific name, that way you know exactly what you're getting. Eriogonum species, otherwise known as buckwheat, not the kind that you get the pancakes from. And then the Baccharis species, otherwise known as, unfortunately, as coyote bush. But there are different forms of each plant and different species of each within the particular genus. So you want to be really specific in terms of what you find. And because of the amplified effects of your keystone plant species, you can simply plant one of these things to start with and build from there. One of these will get you started on your habitat garden. If you want to maybe you already have a native garden and you want to just boost it in terms of habitat value, try to plant some of these plants. And this is what the Prunus ilicifolia looks like in bloom. This is in my home garden, and this is covered with pollinators in the spring when it blooms out. And it's evergreen, super easy to grow, and very seedy once it produces cherries, which are not, I mean, you can like get a little bit of meat off of them, but they don't really have much flesh on them. You will get seedlings, and so they provide abundance that way, and you can give them to all your friends for treats and goodies to put in their gardens and spread the goodness. So the power of connections, those plants now, we've talked about plants in the habitat creating that framework of relationships for other organisms. And so, looking at plants in this way, is going to change your own relationship with your garden. You're going to start seeing things that you hadn't seen before. And so your relationship with your own garden, your own habitat garden is going to become deeper and more connected. And you become one of these nodes in here. So proof is in the pudding, right? So this is over at the Primrose Garden. And here we have Epilobium ciliatum coming up. I did not plant this. Gardens with native plants seem to encourage other native plants to colonize. They're like, the ones that are there are saying, come, this is a good spot. There's a lot of goodies that we can share. And so you can see here's a little bee. I think this is an Anthrophora species here. You can see her mouth parts almost exactly are the same shape as the flower. So she is undoubtedly spreading this plant. And we know that connectivity promotes the spread of plants into adjacent areas. So again, it's that ripple effect that you get when you have that habitat garden. And when you connect patches, this is why we're doing the Embarcadero Road Pollinator Corridor project. When you connect these gardens together, you find that more native plants are found in those patches then that are connected via those corridors, because you get gene flow between those areas via that corridor. So yet again, the relationships between areas are strengthened by the plants. And native plants are powerful. You probably have guessed where I'm going with this. You've got this power that you can wield. And the gardens are very dynamic. And by dynamic, I mean is that they're not static. They're always evolving. And so the garden that you start planting is not the garden that you're going to end up with, because those plants, especially like annuals, they will move around to be where they want to be. And so the relationships between the plants themselves, the organisms that use the plants, they're caretakers, that's you, and the overall structure of a garden changes over time because everything is using the garden, everything is moving seeds around, everything is moving pollen around. And so you have to just kind of let that happen. And it does happen over time. Our gardens don't look anything like they did in the beginning. They've just gotten more and more complex and rich and biodiverse. So, and the ways that we do that is we keep adding plants. And this is one of my favorites. I'm a sucker for a pink flower. And this is one of our native bulbs, Brodea californica. Look how pretty this is with a nice pink stripe down a pale pink petal. So lovely. Um, so keep adding plants. If you imagine building a house, the keystone plant species are like those load-bearing walls, essential for the structure and the stability of the entire building. Once those walls are in place, you can add other components like floors, doors, and windows, representing the various plant and animal species that the habitat supports. So keep adding more and more plants. You think, how could I find a spot? There's always room for more plants, trust me. And so with these plants, you use their water conservation superpower. And it's because of those biological connections in the water cycle. Plants and animals store water in their living tissues and move it through the environment using various processes. Remember, those insects that are eating those plants are not just getting chemicals, they're getting moisture. And they become little bags of moisture themselves. And so what you end up with in the water cycle is you have plants doing uptake and then plants and animals sharing those resources, and then plants putting forth water through their pores into the atmosphere. So this is the living part of the water cycle. It's not a huge part, but the size does not mean that it's not important. It's hugely important. So it's a lot of power packed into living processes. And so this native plant superpower is transferring moisture to other organisms. I like to think about in terms of conserving water, we have rain barrels, we have water gardens, we have organisms. Yet another tool in our tool belt for saving moisture and storing moisture. You end up with juicy caterpillars, like this is the Neoterpes edwardsata eating a poppy. These are a little purple, not purple, orange colored moth, actually, that eats poppies. And this is probably a hair streak larva, and of course, monarchs, and all kinds of little creatures chomping down on plants. And the moisture then is transferred to other organisms that eat these because these are food. And so what are some of the implications of seeing native plants in food? Um, because these plants do attract these organisms, you have to be able to let these organisms complete their life cycles. And so this is part of the relationship with your native plant garden. It's not just enough to plant it, but you want to make sure that the organisms that use the plants then can complete their life cycles. They can mate, they can lay eggs. Those eggs can develop into pupa and overwinter and turn into caterpillars then, which turn into butterflies or bees or whatever that particular larva is going to be. And those larvae are going to attract birds because there's nothing better to feed baby birds than a nice fat juicy larva. Um, and because your habitat will attract birds, you want to be sure that you're making your windows safe for birds. And this is a great website that talks more about that, the American Bird Conservancy. Super important to consider. I put up Post-its in my windows in my office, which has floor to ceiling windows, and we use blackout curtains. You just want to make the windows visible because with a reflection on a window that looks like a tree, a bird will fly into the window thinking that there's a tree there. So you want to be able to try to keep window strikes to a minimum. So you want to make things safe for birds so that they can complete their life cycles. And again, you know, for every species of butterfly on the planet, there are 19 species of moths. So some people say, you know, I don't know if pollinators are coming to my plants. Some things are pollinated at night by moths, and we don't see them because, you know, do you go out at 7:14 p.m.? Okay, so I just pressed my watch. Um, these plants, you know, some of them are night blooming, and pollinators such as moths come out and pollinate plants at night. And unless you go out with a flashlight at night and look for moths, we're not really aware of them, except, of course, if you have a window open where moths are attracted, or you have lights on outside all the time that attract insects. And this is not good. This is going to allow a lot of predation on these insects. Some will become exhausted and die trying to get at that light source. And light pollution harms those animals that your habitat attracts. So you want to minimize your light pollution. Reduce it by using motion sensing lights outside. You don't need to leave your lights on at night continuously, it's just not necessary. If you do move away from the blue light and go to a yellow light, a warmer colored light, it's not as attractive. And use blackout fabric in your curtains to block the light from escaping to the outside. It will also help migrating birds. Birds migrate at night as well, and other organisms that the creatures of the night like it dark. And so, you know that you're doing it right when you go out in the morning. Maybe you water your plants with the hose, and a bunch of moths fly out of the bushes. That's how you know that your yard is nice and dark. So just be mindful of things that you can do to help organisms complete their life cycles. And so these best practices, you know, native gardens are less maintenance than a non-native garden with a lawn. You don't have to fuss with these. You basically want to leave a garden alone. Your main chore will be weeding. Keep the weeds at bay. Don't let them build up. I'm guilty of this myself. Keep, weed constantly, but for short stretches at a time. Don't feel like you have to do it all at once. When you do initially plant, irrigate those plants to establish about once a week. And then make sure that you group plants together that are similar in terms of what they like for water. Put the ones that don't like summer water together, and then the other ones that do like summer water, they might need water once a month during the summertime, and you'll want to water them deeply on a cool morning so that the soil isn't all hot and stuff, because that's not good for soil chemistry and organisms that live in the soil. And just water outside that root ball so that the roots have to look for moisture, and that'll help them establish. I try not to prune things, except to control things for fire safety. You don't have to fertilize. You don't use leaf blowers in these areas. If you have heavy clay soil when you're planting, you can amend with something like a cactus mix, or if you're getting ready for fall planting, which is the best time to plant, start a bed now, pile it high with mulch, and let it kind of get eaten by the organisms in the soil to loosen up a heavy clay soil months ahead of time. That way, you don't have to deal as much with amending the soil later on. You can leave areas of bare dirt for nests. 70% of native bees nest underground. And so you don't want to be putting herbicides, fungicides, or pesticides on your plants, because if that gets into the soil, it's going to affect those developing larvae. And it's going to be harder for them to complete their life cycles. And again, don't use leaf blowers in planted areas. Those plants want to have their leaves underneath. It's just, that's how you have a healthy plant. You can put mulch on top of those leaves if you don't like the way they look, like 1 chip thick, so that it looks uniform. And nobody will be the wiser that you didn't clean up the garden. You don't have to. The less you do, the better. Just weed and just enjoy watching life explode in these gardens. Again, leaves as mulch. And I cannot stress how good leaves are for the environment. They provide a place for insect species to overwinter, and the birds will find them. Other species will burrow into that, like bees will overwinter in there. Other insects eat dead leaves. So leaves as mulch are ecosystem gold. We leave the leaves. They help prevent weeds. They absorb water like a sponge. They filter water. They hold in soil moisture, insulate the soil, and keep the soil cool. And leaves encourage fungal decomposition, and they quickly break down. People say, well, the leaves are smothering my plants. If they're huge leaves, you can kind of brush them off. I just basically leave the leaves on top of my plants because they will break down and then drop down into the plant, and then land on the soil. And trees do better in soil with lots of fungal connections. They don't do as well when you have a lot of bacteria in the soil. They prefer fungus. And so this video here shows me harvesting Pizolithus tinctorius. You've probably seen this in your gardens yourself or seen it around. It's also called the Bohemian truffle, sometimes called dead man's foot fungus. And it's these are like these are great. I harvest these and use the spores in planting holes to help the roots establish because they form associations. The mycorrhiza, the fungus forms an association with the roots and they trade nutrients back and forth. And whenever I see one of these, I'm a happy camper. And this is actually really likes to be around those manzanitas, those arctostaphylos. And this was actually harvested in my front yard where I have a couple of really big arctostaphylos, stensiflora, Howard McMinn's. And I get these every year. And so clearly they're enjoying each other's company and forming their nice relationship there. So if you see this, this is good. It looks hideous until you know what it is. And I call that my secret weapon. So again, leave the leaves. They provide a foundation of life. So I like to think of this as kind of like a lasagna of goodies, with leaves forming the pasta layer. You can do layers of bark mulch being the meat, and then more leaves will drop on top. And then you could do more mulch on the top, and you end up with a nice lasagna of mulch and stuff. And these kinds of layers become like these organism cities. You have all kinds of creatures living in these areas because it's moist and shady. You'll end up with salamanders, you'll end up with larvae, you'll end up with a whole bunch of things. And again, the larvae do hang out in the leaves. If you flip over the leaves, you will see creatures like that, and the birds are going to find them. So this is what you're aiming for. So with all of that, with these habitat gardens, you wield the power of creating this dynamic beauty. And among the wonderful things provided when you plant native plants, amongst other things, the water conservation, the abundance of life, and all of this, you are providing opportunities and resources for other organisms to complete their life cycles. So allow time for the biological processes to take place. Really, just, don't fuss with things. And so this is over at the Hopkins Garden. These are two Ackman blue butterflies in a mating dance. And they're doing that right above our coastal buckwheat, the Eriogonum latifolium. And that's the plant they lay their eggs on. They don't like to go far, if they don't have to go far to lay the eggs. But that's what you get to see. You get to see all the love that is created with these plants. And so bumblebees overwintering in valley oak leaves. Like I said, I've vetted all of these things. And so this is a video of the Gwenda Street Garden. And there's a bumblebee queen. She's looking for a place to get into the oak leaves underneath the big valley oak that we have there. That's why we leave the leaves. And this is from the Xerces Society webpage showing that this is exactly what they do. And a little bit about bumblebee ecology and their life cycles. Pruning practices, you know, like I said before, a little pruning at a time, maybe once a year or less, and let observation be your guide. What species do you see using resources? When are they using the resources? So, um, again, when are things using things? So in the summertime, we have stem nesters, and a lot of plants have a hollow stem. And insects love these to nest in. Bees as well as wasps will nest in them. And so we leave about a foot of length when we cut down some of these dried up stalks, when we uh, do any sort of deadheading, although we don't do all that much because it's just more work and insects will find their way in. And so leave the seed heads, leave the stems for the birds. Um, I have birds using the seed stalks from March all the way through summertime because these seeds, they will stay on these seed heads for months. And so even when you think there can't be anything left, wait another month or two to cut these down. And then just to be sure that I'm not like depriving anything, I will leave a pile of these seed heads in the garden to break down. But the birds do appreciate a stable source of food. Again, you know, don't rush to clean up the garden. Again, with the pruning, this is goldenrod here. And I actually had gone out one January thinking that I was going to tidy things up and cut down the fluffy tops of the goldenrod, thinking that there could not be anything left for anything to use. But hummingbirds actually nest starting in January. And this hummingbird is actually collecting fluff to line her nest with. So that day I was taught a very good lesson, which I'm passing on to you guys. And I did not cut this down that day. I waited for a few months because I felt chastened by what I was observing. So you want to be observant, just hang out, see what's using resources when they're doing it. And they'll do it about the same time every year. So, and you'll end up with ground nesters. We actually have birds nesting in the primrose garden right now. And you know that they're nesting close by when you're out in the garden and you hear something chirping at you in an angry fashion. That means you are too close to their nest. And that's what happens in a habitat garden. You want to be able to let them be, provide some nice dense cover if you want birds nesting. Dense cover is very helpful for the ground nesters. So some final thoughts. I know it's a lot to take in, but start simple. And as your understanding of how planting California natives helps the environment, so does your ability to optimize the power of your native plant garden, leading to an abundance of life, as well as enhancing your role in caring for nature's complex beauty. And on a personal note, as a designer, even though I design for things to look good, I now design to create an abundance of life. And so my design imperative has been changed as much as the gardens have changed over time. And with that, I will stop sharing and take any questions that anybody might have.
Okay, we had a few interesting questions. The most recent, when you were speaking about light and light pollution, a student wrote in saying, "We have a very bright street light over our yard. Does that affect the circadian rhythms of plants and pollinators? And if so, do you have recommendations?"
Um, it might. It depends on the color of the light. I know that the lights, depending on what kind of light it is, whether it's like down facing, so that the light is aimed downwards, so that you don't end up with like light up in the sky. It's one of those dark skylights. You're still illuminating the ground, And so depending on the color temperature of that light, if it's warmer, it's not affecting things as much, but it's not good. Um, and the technology actually exists because of the way that we can use LED lights and chips, is that those lights can go on in terms of, they can be set up as motion sensors. That technology actually exists. So even something like a street light, I know this is a crazy thing to say, even something like a street light does not need to be on all the time. We have the technology to uh, to mesh lights together so that they will go on if there's movement under them, and they can stay on as long as there's movement. And that's really what you want light to do, is to create illumination, to provide a way to find your way in the dark when you're moving around. Um, but so the answer is it might be affecting those things, and we can certainly do better. I'd love to see uh, some of the innovation that we have available here in Silicon Valley. Do some pilot projects where we can like do some science to see how we can maybe help with any sort of light pollution affecting creatures and other organisms from completing their life cycles.
Excellent. Thank you for that. Somebody commented that the chat seems to be disabled. I was able to write something in the chat, but I don't see that anyone else has. So I was trying to figure that out. I will work on that. There's another question. If the previous owners of a garden have used herbicides, might this impair the growth or health of the native plants I put in? And is there anything I can do to help the soil recover?
I would say yes. So anything, if you can get some leaves, if you can get some mycorrhiza, like I mentioned with the Bohemian truffles, um, and um, let those processes of nature sort of clean up the soil for you. Um, you know, the herbicides do break down depending on the type that they're using. Some of the pesticides I know persist a little bit longer. And so you want to basically try to support the plants by, giving them what they need to establish and adapt to those situations, with the leaf mulch, with the mycorrhiza, planting during the cool rainy season to get that process started so that nature can clean things up. Um, you know, but that's kind of an unknown in terms of like, if you don't know what was done before you, all you can do is your best practices and hope that that is enough. I think it probably should be. Um, I don't know what kinds of herbicides or fertilizers or anything were used in any of our native plant gardens, but they've done quite well. And whenever something hasn't really um, done well, and it's been a while since that's happened, um, and it's usually because we don't have the right mix of plants, usually not enough adapted keystone species that have been there for a while. Um, but I would say start with the keystone first, use the leaves, use some mycorrhiza if you can find it, and just keep adding plants and um, you know, overwhelm hopefully the poisons that are there, and um, things will turn themselves around.
Great. Do you have suggestions for natives in areas of wildlife, such as deer, rabbits, and gophers?
Yes. So whenever I plant things that are young and small that are going to be eaten, I try to protect those with chicken wire, or I use wire cages. I even use wire waste baskets flipped over, like a little cage on the top, until they're of a considerable size and they can't be pulled out easily. Um, if you have deer, you're going to have to cage those plants up until they get to a tall enough size that the deer aren't going to eat them down to nubbins. Um, in terms of rabbits, same thing, cage those up. For gophers, the underground subterranean dwellers, um, some people, if they're doing bulbs and things like that, will put chicken wire cages underground in the planting hole first, and then plant in that. What I prefer to do, I don't do that myself, is consider that those rodents are going to be food for something else. And so, um, you're going to have birds of prey coming in, owls perhaps, put up an owl box, and let nature take care of that for you, because everything is something else's meal. And it starts with starlight, and everything else, just everything gets eaten one way or another.
And can you please also do a quick rehab of how you use the Bohemian truffle or dead man's foot fungus?
I'm always happy to talk about Bohemian truffle. Um, so the thing about the Bohemian truffle is that it's very crumbly, and when you crumble it up into the spores, it's very much, it looks like cinnamon powder. And what I do is I take a pinch of that, and in the planting hole, I sprinkle it and then wet it down. Try not to breathe in the spores, because who wants to have fungus in your lungs? So turn my head away as I sprinkle, and then I plant the plant. So that's an easy way to do it. Another thing that you can use it for is to root cuttings of plants. So you can, and people actually like sell the stuff for the very purpose. It's not a rooting hormone per se, but you can dip the end of a cutting into the spores and then put that into a planting pot, and that will help that plant root out. So super easy. It's just kind of like a little magic powder you can put in a planting hole or use as a rooting uh, uh, emphasizer.
And we have a question that's kind of specific to the county fire and weed ordinance, but as a side note to that, that you might be able to help address, if the individual is required, if they're on a list of properties that is inspected for high weeds, and they'll, potentially get fined if they're not taken care of, is there anything that you could suggest that they might be able to plant to help negate the weed proliferation, or strategies that they can do that are, nice, sustainable, organic, and hopefully native strategies to help them get
Yeah,
something else established?
absolutely. So the things that you are going to want to plant are going to be evergreen with juicy leaves. So things like ceanothus, that is, uh, it stays tidy looking, and things like Arctostaphylos, very tidy looking. Um, and, probably you want to stay away from wide swaths of annual plants that will eventually dry up. So maybe do those in pots or in really confined planting beds. And then, because this has come up before, and plant things like toyon, the heteromeles, the toyon, which is actually fire resistant. So things like that, and look over the fire list to make sure that you're not planting something that's like got a lot of resin and oils in it. And one of the things that I find to be um, good to make a garden look so that it's not looking weedy is to make it look intentional. And the way that you make it look intentional is with that one chip thick, small bark mulch. That stuff cures a lot of evils because it makes everything look intentional, makes it not look like just a bunch of weeds, right? It makes it look like someone's taking care of it. And you don't have to do a really thick layer. You can just put down like what I call a skim coat to make it look intentional. So evergreen plants, um, planted in such ways that they're not like a huge swath of like hard to get through shrubbery, but maybe defined areas with pathways through them, and then a nice mulch kind of defining those areas so that it looks very intentional and very well cared for. Um, and uh, those are just some of the ways that I would recommend. But you do have to be careful in the wildland interface areas where there's real problems with wildfires. So things like the native grasses, um, you know, again, you have to be very careful on how you site those things. Um, I try not to use grasses in my gardens because they're kind of seedy and they will spread. It makes it harder actually to take care of a garden, in my opinion. They're great habitat plants, but when they are dry, they are quite flammable. So, just really consider those things that are like evergreen, like your ceanothus, like your octostaphylos, you know, like your live oaks, the ones that are evergreen, your your Prunus salicifolia, the evergreen cherry, things that have those glossy green leaves are not going to be um, they're going to be more fire resistant, I think, than the things that are drier. You can also tuck in a lot of succulents. Um, and I'm actually giving away a bunch of succulents on Sunday. Um, so, just another plug for that event coming up. And so there are strategies around fire safety that you can deal with. And I have in the past had to design for wildland interface properties. So it's a real concern. You have to be careful.
And I thought that was it, but it looks like we have one other. Oh, that person just said, thank you for your answers, Juanita.
You're
And
welcome.
I also requested that he contact me directly for some additional information as far as the city's policies go. And we did have a comment, very helpful, thank you. And person mentioned that the chat was disabled for her as well. Fantastic, inspiring, and practical talk. Thank you so much. So those were the last of the questions, unless anybody has a last minute entry. I think that's it for tonight. I did put my email in the question and answers. So if you did have any additional questions, please feel free to contact me directly. Oh, we have a last minute question. Can magnolia leaves be helpful?
Uh, I suppose in moderation. They can take a while to break down. I just feel so sorry for the magnolias. They're native to southern United States, and so they prefer more of a humid, warmer, wetter environment than we have here. Um, but you can put them into a compost bin. You can create um, a heap of those leaves in areas if you wanted to create like some little niches for organisms to get in. Um, I'm not opposed to using any sort of organic matter to create niches for organisms, um, you know, but they might take a while to break down. So it depends on what you're using them for. Um, if you're looking to create habitat niches for things. You can make a pile. If you're looking at them as mulch, you may not want to make a really thick layer of those in particular.
And the person made a comment, yes, magnolia trees as Santa Clara street trees was a poor choice. I agree. I've been actually trying to work with Public Works Department to get some more native trees on our list, but they're not always perfectly well acclimated to our urban environment. However, you might be happy to know that there have been some California statewide tree studies and actually all over the West Coast. And there's an active plan to try and get some of those recommended species into many urban environment street trees. So hopefully we'll see that
Nice.
coming in the next 5 or more years. And then
I
we had a comment.
suspect,
Thank you for your presentation. Lots of helpful information.
I suspect, just going back to the trees, that as we plant more native trees that we will mitigate some of those issues with climate. Um, I was actually came across a study that the reforestation in a certain place, in a certain area in the southern United States, has created a spot where they don't have as much temperature increase as they do in other places. So it appears that the replanting of trees in a spot in the southern United States has actually mitigated the temperatures there. And so I suspect that the effect of these trees, because of their amplified impact, we cannot say for sure how big or small, but I suspect it's like the tip of the iceberg that we understand, that it will help mitigate some of those problems with planting those in the area, especially if we make a forest of the things that used to be here. You know,
Absolutely.
you know, I suspect that that's the case, but that's there's no science behind my opinion, but I suspect that that might be true.
Well, and we can all hope for an increase of our urban forestry trees as time goes
Yes.
on, because we desperately need them for all sorts of the benefits that they provide. So, oh, and one last question again. I have 2 tulip-shaped flower magnolia trees with green leaves similar to fruit trees, not the heavy waxy type of leaves. I leave the leaves on the ground. Oh, it wasn't a question. It was just a follow-up to that prior comment.
Nice.
All right. So with that, I just wanted to thank you again, Juanita, for the wonderful information. Again, I've taken a bunch of notes and thanks for all the wonderful questions from our participants. And we will say good night.
Thanks, Victoria. It was a pleasure.
Thank you. Take care, everyone.